Today's guest is Brett Hornung, a strategy manager at Accenture leading a variety of Web3 initiatives and projects. We explored the future of the internet, the new ways of using brand loyalty points with Web3, the value of digital ownership, and the importance of a democratic internet. Get ready for a captivating conversation. All right, Brett, thank you so much for coming on to Now and Next. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah,
Thanks for
I'm
having me.
good. Absolutely. You're someone that I read your newsletter a lot. I follow all the things that you publish. So for those who don't know Brett, I'd love for them to get to know Brett. Please introduce yourself for a bit, and we'll get right in after.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate the kind words. So for those that don't know me, my name is Brett Hornung. I've been in the blockchain space maybe now for the past 6 or 7 years. I've been working at Accenture, leading a lot of the Web3 activities out here in growth markets. I'm currently based in Hong Kong. But like I've been mentioned, right, I'm very passionate about Web3 and kind of bringing it to life. And so I write a blog 3 times a week. I maintain a newsletter, and I'm pretty active. I think it's just in the general space. So super excited to be here and share my thoughts today.
So looking into the future, how do you envision the internet in 10 years? And what will Web3's contribution be into this new internet?
Yeah, I think that Web3, right, as a movement, it's placing the focus on the user, right? So putting that kind of, the opportunity for the user to have ownership, to teach them about, your digital world today is not akin to the physical world that you demand, right? You demand property rights, you demand to own things, you demand to have a say in the physical world. But in the digital world, that's just not how our lives work today. So I think Web3 as a movement is trying to get to the point of saying, hey, let's improve our digital lives, right? And whether it's a fully decentralized internet, which probably is not 10 years away, it's probably much further, if at all, right? But it's embedding those concepts into the internet itself of portability, interoperability, ownership, and allowing users to have the ability, if they want, to have actual ownership in our digital lives. I think that's like the game-changing thing that Web3 is bringing about.
So if I were to restate that in a way, the same way I can buy a house and I've got that proof, I've got the deed, I've got the contracts, everything. Web3 is enabling people to buy a digital item and have the proof that they are the true owner and not something or someone else elsewhere, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one element of it. I look at Web3 as like the wider token economy, right? So anything where you're improving kind of transparency, portability, interoperability, ownership across the internet kind of all falls underneath that bucket. But for your specific example, yeah, it's if I buy a t-shirt in the physical world, I can take that out of the store, I can sell it to a friend, I can gift it, I can, tear it up. I can really do whatever I want with it because I actually own it. Now, if I go buy a digital t-shirt today, right, not in a Web3 context, right, I can't actually take it outside the walls of whatever system I'm using. So I don't actually own it. I'm more of a renter from that perspective. And I think that's like the game-changing difference that we're bringing about in this space is we're actually mimicking kind of what's happening in the physical world and what people expect. It's just not there yet from the perspective of education, from an understanding of the general population, from the usability or the user experience, right? Like those elements aren't there yet. Similar to how the physical world is so easy to do that, it's not yet so easy to do that in the digital world.
So we're talking about physical world and digital. What's the difference between Web 2 and Web 3? Like the Web 2 that everyone knows and has been consuming and using for years, and this, well, no longer totally new, but newer thing called Web 3. What's the difference?
Yeah, so I think they're much more kind of acronyms, or almost like just words we use to associate with a general wide era. I think that there will always be elements of Web 2, and what people refer to as Web 2 is where kind of there's these centralized players on the internet that are maintaining the internet or providing the infrastructure, but in doing so, you're giving up your data, right? And they're kind of in the driver's seat. I think with Web3 puts the user in the driver's seat. Now, is everything on the internet going to be putting the user in the driver's seat? Probably not, right? But I think it's the element, it's that um, implication of ownership of, putting the user in the driver's seat, giving the user power is why Web3 is, kind of so powerful in the market. So I think the combination of Web 2 and Web 3, right, will always be around, or at least will be around for a long time. And then different elements will just be worked in based on where the user experience is actually benefited by these, the associated technologies with Web 3.
So look, give me an example. Like, what does that mean for the everyday person who wakes up, does their job, goes to bed at the end of the day? What does that mean for them?
Yeah. So for the everyday person, right, if you have a general understanding of tokens, I think you probably will have an appreciation for digital ownership in the near term.
Sorry,
Right?
what's a token? And in the way that you're describing it, what's a token?
Yeah. So so a token, right, is a verified proof of ownership, I would say, right? It's something that's a stamp. It's not an actual thing. It's a technology construct, right? There's a digital product that probably sits on top, even maybe a physical product that links back to this digital proof of ownership. Okay. So for the everyday person that doesn't have any concept of Web3 or blockchain or tokenization, I think in the interim, in the near term, you may end up using it without even knowing it, right? You may also realistically probably not use it in the near term. Now, 5, 10, 15 years from now, you may be using it still and not even know it. But I think that the general education will come with as people are using this and as they're able to do things like, a large portion of the population plays video games. And a lot of the major video game studios have announced movements into this space. I mean, you just saw, right, what the recent news with Nike and Fortnite. You saw kind of with EA Sports, right? You saw with Square Enix. So there are major announcements, and a lot of people play video games. And a lot of people know that today I cannot take a Fortnite skin to Call of Duty. But when I can do that in the future, that's going to be teaching people online. I think Roblox is teaching the youth, although it's a Web 2 platform currently, right? They have a lot of the elements of wallets and tokens and unique collectibles and limited edition items and moving them within Roblox to Roblox world. But you're teaching those fundamentals to the youth, to a digitally native youth that are going to proliferate as they mature. And that could be a generation away, right? But it will eventually come. People will come to expect, because of what they know, right, is different than what we know from when we were growing up.
Yeah. Speaking of video game industry, would you say that that is the one that stands the most to gain from the Web3 movement? Are there other industries that you're seeing that can benefit a lot, or that is benefiting a lot by this technology?
I don't know if it's the most to gain, right? I think it will be heavily impacted. Now, without speaking in a general term or a general sense, right? Like, I'm not sure if Web3 is as good for their business models as their current business models from a profitability standpoint, right? That I think that time will tell as we start to see these games, actually have interoperability across them. So I'm not sure. I think it will be one of the most impacted. And then the concepts of gaming, so stripping away, true video games and taking gamification out of it, I think will be the biggest impact that comes out of this, because people will start to use these digital assets as incentive mechanisms in all forms and fashions. So you'll see, consumer good brands or fashion brands, right, starting to use these as digital fashion pieces. You'll see other types of consumer goods brands start to use them for loyalty programs. You'll see airlines start to use them for ancillaries. You will see a variety of gamification mechanisms baked into all forms of consumer engagement. And I think that's one, because of the rise of Web3 and digital ownership, but the other is because of the rise in video games and just the sheer amount of people that are playing mobile games, true like desktop games, video games, etc.
So I want to go back to that aspect of how the business model may not be as profitable versus the current one that they're doing right now. Why would you say that the Web3 business models would not be as profitable? What are you seeing?
So again, I think time will tell. I don't have this as fact right now, but just if I think out loud, right? Like, if today, say I make 100 skins and I sell 100 skins in my game, right? $10 a piece, I've just made $1,000. If tomorrow I make 100 skins, but people are bringing 50 skins in from other games and they don't want my other 50 skins, technically I've only made $500, right? Now, do I think business models will evolve to figure out how to monetize people bringing assets across games? Yes. And that's why I'm saying I don't know if it will be as profitable or not just yet. But I think just from the initial onset of if you no longer control the supply, right, theoretically, your price and your demand might go down.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've been thinking about that from a loyalty points perspective, right? Because you brought up loyalty points. So we know Starbucks Odyssey, they've got their, at least, well, not in Canada, I'm in Canada, so I have not been able to experience it firsthand, but I've been reading all the articles about the stamps. But that is in kind of a closed ecosystem. You wouldn't be able to bring those stamps out to, for example, Second Cup or another coffee retailer. But if every company closes their ecosystem, then that portability aspect loses value. So I'm not sure if all companies will close their ecosystems, but I think that there's an opportunity to have it open because it enables those brands to double down on loyalty. And if you have the option to go elsewhere, but you choose to stay, that really demonstrates that you're loyal to that brand, you love that brand, their products and everything like that. So maybe from a financial perspective, they may make less money, but from a brand loyalty perspective, they may end up making more, generating more from that single user because that person has the option to go elsewhere but chooses to stay. So what do you think? What are like, and I mean, nothing is fact here yet. We're going to see all of this play out, but do you expect or do you hope for a world where you can port over your points to different brands, or are you expecting companies to say, you know what, we just want our people to play within our camp and not bring those points elsewhere?
Yeah. So, personally, right, I obviously hope for, I'm a firm believer in digital ownership. I'm a firm believer in the change that it will bring to the internet, and the benefits that I think it will provide to myself and if not the wider population, right? With that said, to your point, I think that we're still very early from the perspective of brands rolling this out. Like you mentioned the Starbucks program, from what I've seen publicly, they it is semi-closed, right? Anybody can come participate as long as you get the invite and wait on the wait list, sign up. But they control kind of the primary, secondary sales, and I think that's very intentional, right? I mean, they operate heavily in the United States, and you don't really know what's going to happen yet in the United States from a regulatory perspective on these types of tokens. So I think they're watching it from that angle. I think they're probably also watching it from, can we roll this out in an iterative fashion where initially we don't open it up, we keep it kind of closed loop so we can test, and if anything is it off or anything's wrong, then we can kind of eventually squash this and go back to what we were doing. But if it goes well, then we can open it up, and maybe it's opening up in iterative phases again, right? So I think like the roadmap that you'll see for enterprise is going to be way different than the roadmap that you see for Web3 natives, just purely from a risk profile, purely from a regulation standpoint, right? Like those two things. I also think there's the idea when on the reward side, the accounting might not be as much of an issue. But when we talk about points, and I think the reason why you haven't seen many established enterprise brands tokenize their points, one, because the points are very valuable, but two, because the accounting behind those points is imagine going on and seeing like a brand A trade or pair being traded on Uniswap. Like that's a wild world if you think about like those pairs that could come about on these decentralized exchanges. And so I think that people may not be ready for that yet, and so they're trying to figure out how can I deploy this in a way that it's getting me to that angle where I think the products need to be freely traded, but they're doing it in a way that's controlled you contain the risks, you make sure you're complying to get to that end state. So I think it's positive at the end of the day, but I think we're just, brands are on that journey.
Yeah. Speaking of enterprise, I think that one thing that's going to lead to mass adoption is enterprise adoption. It won't be the only thing, but I think it's going to be a pretty big piece of the pie. What will it take, given your experience and what you know, what will it take for enterprise to adopt these Web3 technologies, whether that's just a simple NFT that you give to say, hey, thank you for being a fan, and like that's, the art is the utility, all the way to points that you can trade and redeem and do things with?
Yeah, so I think if we think about the non-fungible token side second, or the more brand side second, and we think about the fungible tokens or like crypto, right? Like only really just recently are we seeing traditional financial institutions get into this space. And they've been looking at this stuff for 7, 8, 9 years, much longer than the brands have kind of been in this space, right? Up until NFTs really had their moment, traditional enterprise wasn't doing too much in and around tokens. Traditional brands weren't doing in and much around tokens. And so I think if you think of that as like an analogy, right? Brands are kind of on this roadmap to get there. Token platforms, wallet infrastructure, the user experience on the brand side for the platforms is so much further behind than on the fungible token side, right? It's almost incredibly easy to trade Bitcoin today if you want, right? But to go buy an NFT, right? The past 2 years, it wasn't easy. Maybe the past 6 months, we're starting to see a lot more maturity, a lot more improvement, a lot more focus on the user experience, but it's just not there yet. So I think like it'll become a reality, and brands will find out where they can use it. I think initially there was also a lot of hype, which diluted the space because people were rolling out products that just weren't good, right? They did not have product market fit. People were rolling out tokens in the form of products rather than products in the form of tokens. And I think now, as people actually develop strategies, as people understand their customer, not just the Web3 native customer, but their, the 95% of their other customers that, might be able to buy this stuff if it's easier to use. I think that's where we'll see strides in terms of maturity, strides in terms of adoption. And then you'll start to see the proliferation of this used, whether you actually know that you're using it or not.
I like that line that you said. People were rolling out tokens as the product versus, wait, I'm butchering it. You got to say it again. That was such a good line.
So, you mentioned earlier, like, what's a token, right? And I was like, that's a very fair question, because what I try to tell people is we're building products in the form of tokens, not tokens in the form of products. So we were specifically talking about tokens, which is why I mentioned the term token. But I try to get people to think about, like, what am I actually building, right? You're not building an NFT. An NFT is not it's not a thing, right? It's a construct. It's a standard. It's a technology decision that you make in order to implement a product, right? And so whether it's a piece of fashion, or it's a trading card, or it's a loyalty reward for a unique experience, or it's a ticket, whatever it might be, right? That is the product. And then you're using tokens because it satisfies a condition where a token actually makes sense.
Yes, because sometimes you don't need a token for what you're trying to accomplish. Just like, I think it was Kodak a couple of years ago. It was like, yeah, we're going to go on the blockchain or whatever. They made this big announcement. Their stock price had a little bump, and they have not released a single thing. So that just was kind of a marketing play. And I think a lot of, not just big brands, like other small projects were trying to do the same thing of saying, yeah, we're going to do this NFT. We're going to launch this Web3 related thing just to get some interest. And then it didn't really deliver anything to its audience. Right. So now flipping from enterprise to the Web3 native projects, because sure, there are a lot of bad ones or just cash grab projects, but there are some really interesting things people are building. So for anyone who might be building something of value, that cares about finding that product market fit, solving a real problem with Web3 technology, what do they need in order to drive adoption in a very general sense? Because you could be building a Web3 product in a wide array of industries and verticals,
right?
But at a high level, if there was a blueprint to getting to adoption or getting users to use your product or service, what would you say that blueprint might be? What would be the steps in that blueprint?
It's an interesting question. I mean, my exposure obviously is definitely more on the enterprise side. But as I think about like what a Web3 native, if I was launching IP as a Web3 native today, like what would I do? Right. I think the first thing is I would raise via traditional methods of raising. I would raise via venture capital funding. Now, it might be very difficult today, given the current state of the venture capital market, but that is where I would raise from. I would kind of validate that, hey, we're trying to do this the traditional way per se. We have this team, we're all doxed. Like we are building this, we're invested in it for the long haul, right? I think that initially is a good way to signify, hey, this is legit, right? The second thing is really around product market fit again. So yes, you might be deploying a token or you might be deploying a project because you are Web3 native, but like make sure that you're not deploying 10,000 PFP because that's what other people have done. And then you're going to try to build a brand around it. Or like figure out like what a community of people that are going after, like who's your target customer, and figure out what they might want. And then start with what they might want. And I know it's very generic, but you could do this. You could do a Web3 project for so many different things. So I'm trying to keep it as pointed as possible. But I think that's the biggest thing is, start from a place of legitimacy and then find a target customer base that you really want to go after and build a product for, and that you think there is a strong product for, and then build the community around it. And Web3 community is obviously very important. It's important to, you're essentially building a brand from the ground up. So if I was building in this space, yes, I would take notes of what to do and what not to do when building a Web3 project. But I'd also look at the historic brands that had kind of like big rises in terms of, they found a customer base, they had a loyal following, and they built off the back of that based on what their customers wanted. In traditional Web 2, right? Traditional brands, because they've all done this before. They've all went through it. And I think, there's elements of Web3 that you need to understand. There's different things around tokenomics, around how you kind of go to market, how you engage the community, right? Because you are catering to Web3 natives to a degree, right? But at the end of the day, it comes back to product market fit. The technology is attractive to a certain subsect of the population, but the product is what will have kind of that lasting value.
So from what I'm hearing, essentially, you just need to do what the Web 2 companies have done to be successful. It's just with a different technology.
Yeah. Okay. So I wouldn't say it like that, right? Because that'll probably get a lot of like negative feedback from, we're just saying, no, go build Web 2. I'm saying more like from the idea of building a brand from the ground up, right? People are going to want certain things, right? Building a brand based on purely financial value is not necessarily a long-term kind of approach, because if the financial value goes to zero for, I don't know, say we have another pandemic and all tokens just crash, right? Your brand no longer is valuable, right? So I don't know if building out solely on financial value is the way that I would go, right? And a lot of people start off with tokens, and that ends up leading to, kind of being about financial value. There are obviously Web3 native communities that have gotten past that. And I think that's like really impressive, right? But if I was, you asked me, right, if I was to do it, I would go look at like traditional brands that have kind of had meteoric rises and say, what did they do from they found a customer base, they built products that customer base wanted, and then they, kind of expanded to, new markets or to new customer bases, but always keeping in mind that original customer base that, got them to where they were. And then, yes, on top of that, you have the Web3 elements because you're probably launching tokens. So you have to have a very good understanding of, what's your wallet strategy? Are you building a wallet? Are you making people do self-custody? Right? Are you partnering with people to do custody for you? How are you going to onboard users that maybe aren't strictly Web3 native? Then around your like contract and token strategy, like what are you actually creating? Where are you creating it? What are the tokenomics around that first product and all the products after that, right? You have to have some form of a roadmap and community, right? So there's the Web3 elements that you need to understand in order to be successful, I think. But from a pure brand building perspective, that's what I'm trying to get at, is like that product market fit, that understanding your customer base. If you want to build a sustainable brand, I think that's the most important thing, irrespective of the technology.
Yeah. How there are so many pieces. Like, let's forget any single product now, but as a space in the Web3 space, like for example, let's take onboarding. The onboarding process is still relatively complicated for a new user who does not want to do hours of research to create a wallet. Like, this isn't like, hey, go on Gmail, create your Gmail, right? It's pretty simple. You've got to remember your seed, well, you know, securely store, however form you want to store it, but you got to remember seed phrase. You've got this alphanumeric wallet thing, like what is that? All of that stuff. So do you think that the space needs to improve its onboarding process before all these products can get mass adoption? Or are people just going to have to learn how to create a wallet, for example?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and like look at all my blogs, like I talk a lot about the user experience. I think that from when I started writing, I really started writing last year in September, and at that point, I would have told you that the wallet user experience is horrendous. Like it is god awful. Like if you go try to teach your parents how to use a wallet, there's no shot, right? Now, I think as an industry, we've come so far since then, right? Like the Crossmans, the Magics, et cetera of the world, right? They're making it incredibly easy to sign up. A lot of people, it's just an email and password. Some people even have Google single sign-on, or right, like I mean it is becoming easy enough to use. I think if you can just sign up, via a QR code that directs you to something where you type in your email and password, and then you have a wallet. Now, I struggle with this, right? Because I think that does improve the onboarding experience. I think we still have probably ways to go around like the interoperability of these wallets and what these wallets can actually hold, right? Because people are still adding more and more features, more and more support for different chains, et cetera. And that just takes time. So it'll come, right? But I struggle with like, if we abstract it away so much that people don't understand, are they just going to be setting up wallets all over the place? Right. And then we kind of lose that aspect of, simplicity. It becomes more complex than if I don't know what I'm doing and I have 50 different wallets at 50 different brands, right? Now, tying it via email is one thing that people are doing, right? So I have let's say my Magic wallet that sits across different things, or I have my Crossman wallet that sits across different things. So, I think from that perspective, it's gotten a lot better. I think there's still a way to go, right? I'm interested to see kind of what happens with account abstraction a lot as well, like with the products that get built off of that.
So can you just define account abstraction for those who might not know?
Yeah, so account abstraction is this new proposal. I mean, maybe it's not as new anymore. It's probably a few months old, but it essentially, how do I explain this simply? It essentially takes apart, so today when you have a wallet, you have a wallet address, and that wallet address can do certain things. Like you can take certain actions, and you take actions on a smart contract. What this new proposal essentially does is allows a smart contract to act as a wallet to give you all of the features that you would come to expect. So basically, if I take a step back, right, today's wallets typically don't have like account recovery. Like if you lose your password, you can say bye-bye to your funds, right? Like there's things like that there's features like that a lot of the wallets today don't really offer. But account abstraction, it allows you to bake in kind of the features, the business rules around the wallet to allow for things like account recovery. And I think there's a bunch of different other elements. I wrote a blog post on it, but that come along with that. And as people start to adopt that standard and build products off of it or wallets off of it, I think the user experience will change, and we'll start to notice that in the industry as it proliferates.
So we started the conversation with ownership, and as one of the benefits of Web3, in a world where we're using our Gmail or just any email and password, help me understand if that ownership piece still applies. Because if I'm using my Gmail, but Google kind of owns the Gmail vertical, and I'm renting that space on the internet, then wouldn't Google own the contents of my wallet if I'm using my Gmail to log in? Or am I understanding that totally wrong?
No, so they wouldn't own it. It would be almost like, I mean, no, because it depends where the keys exist, right? Like it also depends on the specific wallet that we're talking about and how they're doing custody, right? Like for instance, Crossman, I believe has a custodial solution, right?
What does that
So when
mean?
you, it basically means that you don't. So a wallet just essentially holds your private key. Your private key is the keys to your digital kingdom, right? If you don't hold your private keys, you technically don't own that good at the end of the day because somebody else is managing your keys. And if something happens to their systems, then it's out of your control, right? If it's self custody, right, or non custodial, where you actually manage your keys, then it's on you. That's where people say like, not your keys, not your crypto, right? Or people say like, you can become your own bank in this industry, right? Those those elements allow actual ownership. So if I'm logging in with my email and password, some solutions I don't actually own my keys. And so, no, to your point, I technically don't own those goods. Other solutions are non custodial in nature, where they might use kind of a specific custodial architecture in the background that you actually still are a it's non-custodial, but you're able to use your email and a password to log in, right? And I
Okay.
think that delta essentially makes it a lot easier for people to actually, they still own these goods. Like Google doesn't own those goods when they do that. So there, there's a ton of different kind of like architectural patterns, I think, in the background that get pretty technical. But yeah, the concept would be like, if you want true digital ownership, have a self custody wallet, because at the end of the day, it's on you. If you want, digital ownership, but you don't really want to manage all of your goods, right? There are custodial options where somebody else will manage those goods and take on the risk of managing them for you. Just like today, kind of when you put money in a bank, you're kind of saying, "Hey, take care of my money for me." And I think that is like, the difference that people wrestle with, because some people want ease of use. And so they're going to go the custodial route. Other people want actually that true digital ownership and they value that, and they'll go the self custody route. And it'll all come down to user preference. I don't think we should force people to choose. If people don't really value that, then that's okay. We want
Yeah.
an internet that's for everyone. And I think but the ability to choose is the powerful thing that Web3 brings about.
That's one thing that I tell people when I talk about Web3 and when they ask, is that we're not, the space is not about forcing someone to choose between going to their bank or them holding their funds. It's just giving them the option to choose. So I like that you reiterated that point. What's the most revolutionary aspect about Web3? Like, what is the thing where it was like, wow, this makes sense and it is clear that a shift needs to happen thanks to this new technology or this new thing that has been enabled thanks to Web3?
The most revolutionary thing.
Or
I
one
mean,
of.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that the most revolutionary thing about the whole movement, it comes back to like tokens and digital ownership, right? But I don't want to go down that route again. So what I would say is, it's the challenge to the status quo, right? So with Web 2, right, we saw this rise of very large centralized players, both in the technology kind of technology space, in the financial institution space, and even in the traditional brand space, right, where users on the internet really didn't have, like we mentioned this earlier, right, the rights akin to the physical world. And so I think that the revolution is that challenge to that, the challenge to the status quo, to say, hey, maybe there's a way to do this better, or maybe there's a way to do this differently that allows people to, be in the driver's seat, to own their own goods, to kind of have a say, to own their data, to have you kind of these online digital identities. Maybe there's just a different way to improve the overall system. And I would say like that's like the most revolutionary thing. And then from that, right, we've seen ways of improving digital identity. We've seen ways of improving money. We've seen ways of improving access to financial markets. We've seen ways of improving customer engagement and customer loyalty. Right, we've seen all these different elements that are very very fundamentally different, but are all embracing a similar technologies to accomplish that goal of the overall challenge to the status quo.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the really interesting things is how you can send millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, and the transaction fee will probably be about what, $5. I think I saw some people online say. Whereas if you were to do that with the traditional bank, I mean, I've never sent millions of dollars via wire transfer, but I'm sure it's more than just a couple dollars to send that. So for people that have family members in different parts of the world, those people know how complicated it is just to send money to their family. But with crypto, with Bitcoin, for example, you're able to send money to your loved ones very easily, and it'll only become even easier and less expensive as the technology develops. So I think that's one of the really cool, in addition to what you said, another cool use case that Web3 enables.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Hong Kong now. I'm from the US, right? So I have to move money across borders to pay off like credit cards and stuff like that. And you get hit with the exchange rate. It's very real. But I think like your example is another element of challenging the status quo, right? Like the actual movement of money across borders was very controlled, very, very controlled, right? And you see all the developments in the traditional financial institution or financial payment space, right? All the innovation that's happening because of the Bitcoin white paper, essentially, and everything that's followed, right? So it's that challenge the status quo to see a general improvement. And whether that improvement comes from traditional players or it comes from new like Web3 or token native players, right? It's a net benefit to society. And I think that's why it's so revolutionary, is like it's challenging people to say, can we do this better?
Yeah. And another example that just popped in, unrelated to money, but we think that just because we bought something in the physical world that we own it, but sometimes it's not really the case. A couple weeks ago, I bought some bus and metro tickets on my card, right? So it's physical, but like it's on my card, and like every time I tap it, like it's -1 ticket on the card. And I was with some friends, and I had a ticket. My friend didn't have a ticket. There was a long lineup to purchase a ticket. So I was like, hey, like I've got, I don't know, 10 or whatever cards. I'll tap my card -1. You take my card, tap one -1. I bought them. I'm allowed to give one ticket to my friend. Then I don't know, security or whatever came up to me. It's like, if you give it to your friend, that's $500. That's a $500 fine. I was like, but I have the tickets. Why can I not transfer? And he's like, it's a $500 fine if you give it to your friend. I was like, okay, bro, I'm sorry. I think just go pay the $3. We'll wait for you. But like, pay $3 or pay 500. Like, I think it's a pretty clear winner. But I was just so confused because I legally bought the 10 tickets. It's on my card. I own this card, but I cannot decide who I give the tickets to, which I thought was weird, because if the security guy did see me give the card to my friend, he wouldn't have known. So all that to say that even in the physical world and those purchases that we know and are probably already used to doing, we don't always own everything. There's still some sort of governing body who decides how you can use the things that you purchased and you thought you owned. So Web3, given that it's digital and it's all based on smart contracts, the smart contract will automatically allocate and say yes or no. And you can verify that smart contract to say, hey, do I agree with the proponents with what this code is going to enable me to do? So that's another thing where I felt like, just because it's new, just because this Web3 stuff is new, and we're already used to a lot of the things in Web2, that doesn't mean that we own everything that we purchase in the Web2 or in the traditional physical world that we know. And in fact, the Web3 world will give us more autonomy and will enable us to make better decisions, because we now are in control fully of whatever asset that we are purchasing.
If we choose to be, I think, right?
Yeah.
I do think that there will still be like kind of, well, I firmly believe there will still be centralized institutions and centralized players. I think there will be an opening up of walls to a degree where it makes sense and where it's legal, right? But we still will have to play by the confines of existing systems for the foreseeable future. but that opening up the ability to have applications that, we do have more autonomy, we do have ownership. That's, where people are building, where people are trying to figure out what's going to be those use cases that kind of open up the internet and create a more equitable and kind of democratic internet.
Oh, so that's a great way to, I like what you said, because that was my next question is, why do we need a democratic internet? In your opinion?
It goes back to kind of what we talked about in the beginning, really, is like, I don't understand. I mean, I understand how it evolved, how the internet like evolved, right? I don't understand why the vast majority of people don't question the state of the internet like they question the state of the physical world, right? And I think more and more people, as they get exposed to this stuff, or as they're raised more digitally native, will question it, because it doesn't make sense that why we kind of allow it to happen in the digital world, but we don't allow it to happen in the physical world. So from my perspective, I think we should have the same kind of democratic rights that I have maybe as a U.S. citizen, right, in the digital world. And so for me, it's like it's just such a game changer to have ownership, to have property rights, to have a say, right, to be able to do with my things what I want, to be able to do them within the confines of like actual laws and regulations around safety, et cetera, right? But it comes back to that paramount point of, it's about ownership, it's about having rights, it's about being able to do with our things what we want.
But I think if we were to just role play this, I'm the average person. I don't know, a father. I've got kids. I've got a family. I've got a job. I've got people to take care of. I might not have the time to question the state of the internet. The internet allows me to message my family and friends. And so that checks a box, because I get to keep in touch with the people I want to keep in touch with. Now we've got e-transfers, electronic transfers. I can send some money. It might be free or it might cost a couple dollars. I don't have time to question like, oh, why can't it cost less money? Why can't it all be free? So I think either these companies have made it so difficult to understand. No, I'll rephrase. It's difficult to understand, but they've found a way to make us not question it by making it easy to use. Or there's just an element of people want simplicity, and as long as it lets me do the job I need to get done, I don't care what happens in the back end.
Look, at the end of the day, people want simplicity. And if Web3 does not provide a better user experience than the user experience we have today, it's never going to see mass adoption. 100%. I don't disagree with that. I think the vast majority of people probably won't question it in the near future, right? They probably won't be like, yeah, I really want that over this, because to your point, the user experience is not infinitely better for everything. I think you will find things gradually where products are more mature. It's like, hey, that's way easier to use. Why would I not do that? Or brands start to use it and I start to just naturally use it. Or gaming starts to do it and I just start to naturally do it, right? You'll see things seep. I don't think it's going to be overnight where everybody one day is like, the internet, why does it work like this, right? I think it'll be kind of this like gradual thing that where somebody will have that experience and they're like, just like how, a lot of great startup ideas come about. Somebody has an experience and like, why in the world does the world work like this? Like, why is it this hard? There has to be something else out there. And I think that's what we'll have, and we'll have it over 5, 10, 20, 30 years, right? But that change will come about because the user experience will improve. The usage for these things will improve. People will understand why this might be better, right? Better, more significantly better. A digitally native youth will come about. Will be adults earning money, spending money, thinking about things in a very different light. I think all those things will lead to this culmination. I just don't think it'll happen overnight. No way. No way.
That's fair. What role do you think governments play and regulatory bodies play in developing and implementing Web3 technologies?
Well, I think at the end of the day, governments are not going away. And so ideally they play a role that is constructive. It does continue to do what they're set out to do, which is safeguard citizens, ensure that people are not scamming people, cutting down on all the bad actors, right? But I do think they have a role to play in letting innovation thrive. So if I think about like what's going on in out here, right? Hong Kong is very forward on, they want to establish this as a Web3 hub. They want innovation to flourish here. They're inviting companies to come. You look at Singapore, you look at Japan, you look at Dubai, right? You have places out here that are very much kind of, inviting that level of innovation. And I think that's important because you can also learn from like, what is the appropriate law? What is too much risk? What's not too much risk? Laws will come about. It's inevitable. Like I don't think there's a future world where there are no laws around this technology, right? It's just a matter of, can we create laws that foster innovation, but do innovation in a responsible, safe, secure manner? That happy medium, I think, is the role that governments and regulatory bodies need to play in this space in order for it to be successful, for people to be happy, for people to want to build in this space and innovate. That's ultimately, I think, their goal.
You lived in the US and now are in Hong Kong. Why do you think Hong Kong is more Web3 friendly than, say, North America, like Canada, US? What are you seeing being in Hong Kong that kind of says, hey, it makes sense why the government here is more friendly to these technologies versus all the stuff we're seeing in the US?
Yeah, I do wrestle with this because the U.S. historically has embraced innovation much more than anybody else, right? Now, I think there's a variety of factors around kind of political, around the power of the U.S. dollar, around kind of the history of U.S. firms in this space, and potentially bad actors in this space. It's tough to say. Like, essentially, the U.S. is taking our existing laws, right, and applying them to this new space. And I don't know. I'm not a regulatory expert, so I don't know if that's the right route. I can only say that the delta between what the U.S. is currently doing with what Dubai's VARA, Hong Kong's SFC, Singapore, like what they're doing out here, is they're kind of creating new frameworks for virtual asset service providers. And so there's almost this just like difference in terms of how they're approaching it. I don't know the reasons behind why they're doing it this way versus out here we're doing it this way, right? It's just a difference of opinion, I think, currently. And we'll see. I think we're probably years away from actual resolution on all this stuff in terms of like how it shakes out. But in the interim, you are seeing regulations pop up in the likes of like, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, Dubai. So it'll be interesting. It'll be very interesting. It's obviously a controversial space. There's been a lot of high profile scams, right? There's been a lot of high profile financial issues with companies. So we'll see what kind of regulations put in place. I don't think all regulations will be good either. I think there will be regulations, right, that are probably almost too prohibitive for things to exist. So it's finding that happy medium, and as an international kind of technology or international movement, finding those spots that encourage innovation in a safe, secure manner.
And as a final question, what would be your vision for the world, assuming all of this gets mass adoption, usage? What would the world look like?
I think users have a digital identity that's akin to their physical identity. So akin to how my passport can essentially be used anywhere in the world, right? People will accept it. We don't have that today. I think that's the first step, is solving the identity issue on the internet. I think then after that, once you kind of solve that, it's solving the wallet issue, right? So how do I store everything in one wallet that I really understand and is universally accepted? If that becomes a thing, then the ideas of true ownership, interoperability, portability, transparency, all of those things, right, become much easier as I move in between my physical and digital lives. And then I think having the ownership of my data is probably that like end goal, right? Privacy by nature, like privacy preserving technology is included in all this, and then also owning my own data, sharing it with who I want. I think that all of those elements need to be in the in kind of the end all be all solution for this to be a true success. And people are building on in different areas. People are trying to figure out how we make that a reality, and it'll just take time. I mean, it's deep innovation. I think between both traditional enterprise, traditional technology providers, as well as the Web3 natives, right? People are building different things that will innovate the space and push it forward. And I'm super excited for it. I love blockchain. I've been in it, like I said, 6-7 years. I think tokens are an incredible incentive mechanism, and I'm excited kind of to see where this goes.
That's awesome. Brett, thank you so much for your time and sharing this knowledge. This was a really, really fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.